Well, hey, grab a Bible if you got one handy and start making your way to Luke chapter 6. Luke chapter 6. And if you don't have a Bible you can open up or power up with you today, or the one that you can't open up isn't in a language that you can understand when you read it, grab one of these and go to page 703 in these Bibles. 703 in these, that's where you'll find Luke 6. That's where we're going to be today. And feel free to keep that if you need a Bible. That's why we put those there. We'd love for it to be our gift to you today. So Luke chapter 6 is where we're going to be today. If you're a guest this morning or you haven't been around for the summer, first of all, welcome or welcome back. We are thrilled that you are here. We're in week 4. This is the last week of a series that we've called How to Fight Without Losing. And all along the way, what we've said is that's something that all of us are after, but it seems like most of us are really, really lousy at. When it comes to our marriages, when it comes to our relationships with coworkers, when it comes to our relationships with our families or our neighbors or our friends, it just feels like we always walk away from conflict losing. Either we lose the fight, or we win the fight and feel like we lost everything else. We lost our cool, lost our mind, lost the relationship, lost everything that we really wanted out of the relationship, but we won the fight, and it doesn't feel good. We just wish we could walk out of a fight feeling like a winner for once. And so over the last several weeks, we've been talking about that, how we could be people who fight without losing. One of the things that I've told you is even though the Bible talks a ton, Jesus talks a ton about how to do conflict, the New Testament, every single book says something about how people who follow Jesus should walk into conflict. The truth is most of us as Christ followers are really, really lousy at conflict. In fact, in about the year 200 AD, there was a guy named Tertullian, and he wrote that the Romans said about Christ followers, look how they love. It's like these Romans were looking at the Christ followers going, they believe some really weird stuff. And what they believe is out of sync with society. It kind of feels regressive. It's not the kind of thing that we would ever chase after. But what's undeniable about every single one of them is Christians, they can love people. I don't even know Christ followers that would say to any of their coworkers or family members or some of your neighbors, you know what, yeah, you may not believe everything we believe and think everything that we think. You may not have the same ideas, but I mean, look how we love each other. We would never say that today because we're really not that good at it, especially when it comes to conflict. We're not great loving other people. And in a world like the world we live in, where there's so much stuff to fight about, so many ways to go public in our fights, we've got to be better at conflict. That's why we're in this series, what we're talking about over the last 4 weeks. So up to this point, if you're just catching up, we've talked about how to make sure you get the right fight. And then we've talked about setting our feet, setting our posture so that we fight the right fight right. And those are all available online. And really, I'd just tell you, if you haven't been here for the last several weeks, go back and catch up on those because everything that we've talked about up to this point sets us up for what we're going to talk about today when it comes to fighting the fights of our lives. Just starting today, it'd be sort of like if you just skipped practice, you skipped preseason, you skipped all of the games right up to the biggest game against your arch nemesis and decided to show up and play then. Like, I don't like your odds, Zeke. Doesn't work to skip practice, doesn't work to skip preseason, doesn't work to skip all of the early season games and just show up for the game that you've got circled on your calendar against your arch nemesis. It's not going to turn out well for you. So here's my question for you this morning. Do you have an arch nemesis? Do you have an enemy? Do you have a Apollo Creed in your life? Is there a wicked witch of the West in your world? Do you have a whole evil empire in your life? Yeah, you do conflict with other people, and when you do conflict with other people, you want to fight and you want to win, but it's nothing like the conflict that you anticipate with this person. When you really stop to daydream about the fight that you really get right, it's always against them. If all of your battles were dates on the calendar, this is the one that would be circled. This is the one you want to get right, because you feel like if you could defeat this person or these people, you'd never have to worry about losing to anyone ever again. You have that person, maybe those people. I've got those people, enemies. And they sort of feel like they're in a little bit of a different category for me. Maybe they do for you too. Up to this point, we've talked about fighting with other people in our life. And the very first week, I gave you some questions to ask when you're in the middle of a fight. You remember those? One of the questions that I ask you to think through in the middle of a fight is, at the end of the day, what do I really want for us? And in most of the fights that we fight, whether we fight them at home or at work or at school or wherever we're at, when we ask that question about the fights that we're in, at the end of the day, yeah, I want to win the fight, but at the end of the day, I really still want to be married. I still want for us to be on speaking terms. I still want for us to be friends. I still want for us to be able to live under the same roof at the end of the fight, the end of the day. I'm not sure I feel that way about my enemies. Do you? When it comes to my enemies, the truth is, I've got this conflict within me. Maybe you got it too. Between what I want to want and what I honestly want. I was reminded this week of the stories of Nadine Collier, Felicia Sanders, and Wanda Simmons, Polly Shepard, Andrew Thomas. You may not know those names, but you know what they walked through. About 4 years ago, just a little more than 4 years ago, their family members, their loved ones, walked into church. They had a Bible study. Welcomed a young man into their Bible study, went all the way through the Bible study, studied the Bible, talked about it for more than an hour. At the end of the Bible study, they got ready to close in prayer. And as they bowed their head and closed their eyes, he pulled out a gun and massacred them because of the color of their skin. 48 hours later, he was in a courtroom, and they had a chance to speak to him. And one by one, Collier, Sanders, Simmons, Shepard, and Thompson said, I forgive you. I'm praying for you. Comes to my enemy, I want to be like that. I don't want to be like that. You know what I want when it comes to my enemy? I want this.
My name is Maximus Decimus Meridius, commander of the armies of the North, general of the Felix Legions, loyal servant to the true emperor, Marcus Aurelius, father to a murdered son, husband to a murdered wife, and I will have my vengeance in this life or the next.
That's the kind of speech I have when I practice my speech in the shower and my enemy's not invited. Do you talk to your enemies in the shower? The look on Commodus's face is the exact look on the face of my enemy, the quivering lip, the turning away, the cowering in fear when I have my vengeance in this life or the next, when it comes to my enemies, when they finally know that I've won, when I finally get even. Who's with me? But it might not surprise you to know that Jesus is decidedly not with me. But it might surprise you to know why. Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27, Jesus answers the question, what do I do with my enemies? He answers it. He gives us a strategy for doing battle with our arch nemesis, with your ex-husband, with your ex-wife, with your estranged family member, your ex-best friend, with your boss, with that coworker, or that neighbor. I want to read his strategy, but before we talk a whole lot about it, I want us to get to the why. Because if you don't understand why Jesus says your strategy and my strategy for defeating our enemies stinks, you're not going to understand why his strategy matters. You'll never give his strategy a try. And frankly, you and I, when it comes to our enemies, will always be losers. Look at Luke chapter 6, beginning in verse 27. It comes in the middle of one of Jesus' most famous sermons, and he says this, verse 27, "But to you who are listening, I say," okay, stop right there just for a second. I told you we weren't going to talk a whole lot about it, but this is really important for you to know. Jesus is talking to people who are listening. So if you're not listening to Jesus, you don't have to listen to this. Jesus doesn't expect people who are not listening to Jesus to listen to Jesus. He doesn't expect people who are not following Jesus to follow Jesus in this. Now, at the end of the day, I think what you're going to hear Jesus say, if you'll just listen to what Jesus is saying, you're going to agree is a better strategy for defeating your enemies than the strategy you came into today with. But if you're not listening to Jesus, you don't have to listen to Jesus. If you are listening to Jesus, if you say you're listening to Jesus, Jesus has something he wants to say to you, and he's hoping that you're listening. So listen. Luke 6, keep reading. Those of you that are listening, I say, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. If someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt from them. Give to everyone who asks you, and anyone who takes what belongs to you, don't demand it back. Do to others as you would have them do to you. Anyone else thinking, I kind of prefer Maximus? I do. Doesn't it feel a little like Jesus just walked into the huddle with the game on the line, says, okay, guys, the clock's ticking down. This is our arch nemesis, the game of our lives. Here's the strategy. I'm going to fumble the snap. Okay, when I fumble the snap, I'm going to pitch it underhand to the defense because I don't want it to be an incomplete pass. Let's only tackle ourselves and go for the knees, right? Offensive line, if you guys would just lay down when the ball is snapped and make sure that you don't get in the way. You want to make sure there's a good runway so that they can get all the way through, clear path, not touch, no danger of them getting to the other end zone. And here's what's going to happen. We'll get to the end of the game against our arch nemesis, and at the end of the game, tomorrow morning, the headline in the newspaper will read, "Nice team declared the winners, even though the score tells a different story." Jesus, that's not a way to fight without losing. That's a way to lose without fighting. And what's on the line when it comes to my enemy? It's too important for a strategy like that. Jesus, I'm not even sure I want that, if I'm honest. This is my enemy. I don't want to be nice. I don't want a moral victory. I want to win. To which Jesus says, no, you don't. Not if your strategy is your strategy. Your strategy for defeating your enemy is not a winning strategy. It's at best a strategy for something else. It's not the way to get ahead. Look what he says. He goes on to tell you why. Get a pen handy if you got your own Bible. Make sure we're going to mark this up, okay? Look what Jesus says. He says, if you love those who love you, what? Circle this next word. Credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who are good to you, what? Here it is again, circle it. Credit is that to you. Even sinners do that. And if you lend to those from whom you expect repayment, what? Credit is that to you. Even bankers lend to bankers. Even sinners lend to sinners, expecting to be repaid in full. Okay, what is Jesus concerned about here? What does Jesus want for the people who are listening to him? He wants you to have, what's the word? Credit. Okay, what's credit? Any bankers that I haven't offended, you're still in the room? What's credit? Well, what's debit? You know what debit is? It's the opposite of credit. Debit is a withdrawal. It's a cost. It's a loss. Credit is the opposite of that. You understand that? Credit is the opposite of a loss. Are we together? Notice what Jesus is saying. Why is he talking about credits and debits? Because Jesus is concerned that your strategy for dealing with your enemy, that my strategy for dealing with my enemy will leave you without credit. Say it another way, Jesus is concerned that your game plan for dealing with your enemy, my game plan for defeating my enemy, will leave me with no points on the board. And you know what? He's right. Go back to your imaginary conversation with your enemy in the shower. What is it you want? When you're done with them, when you said what you need to say, you told them what you want, when you've done what you want, when you have vengeance in this life or the next with your enemy, what is it you're hoping to get? You're wanting to get even. You know what Jesus is saying here? You know what the problem is with your strategy? The problem with getting even is when you get it, you're only even. And even is not winning. Okay, I love soccer. The idea that two teams could do battle for 90 minutes and end the game in a draw is dumb. Can I get an amen from somebody? Do you know that there are teams who manage the whole game to play for a tie? Because they're afraid if they try too hard for a win, they'll accidentally lose. That's ridiculous. And it's exactly how some of us go into our relationships. Exactly how some of us go into our conflicts. The problem with getting even is when you get it, you're only even. Here's Jesus' question for those of you with enemies. Do you want to get even? Or do you want to win? And he takes it further. You're not going to love this. You know the point Jesus makes here? And we know this about everything else that we do when we keep score. We know it about soccer. We know it about tennis. We know it about baseball. We know it about football. We know it about tiddlywinks. It's true if you're keeping score in your relationships as well. If you end the game even with them, you're no better than them. Isn't that what he says? Remember, he's talking to religious people as he gives this sermon, and he keeps talking about sinners. He says, hey, if all you do is get even, they take something from you and you give something of equal value back to them, if all you're doing is getting even, don't even sinners do that? And you notice he doesn't define sinners. He lets each of them define it by whatever category rises to the top of their brain in that matter. So he's thinking about your enemy and he's hoping that you'll think about your enemy too. So that each of us, each of them get his point. If we only love people who like us and who are like us, we're no better than the people we think are the worst. Jesus wants better for us, for the people who are listening to him, than a life lived like that. So get back to Jesus' strategy for your enemies. Now he's explained why it's his strategy. Your strategy, my strategy, stinks. At best, we're going to end in a tie. You don't want that, and you don't want to want that. So what does he want you to do with your enemy? Well, look back at what he says, verse 27. Gives us some really practical things. Verse 27, he says, but those of you who are listening, I say, love your enemies, do good to those who hate you. He talks about haters. He's talking about anybody that has an active ill will against you. You have people like that in your life? People for whom it seems like their life mission is your misery. Jesus says, here's a strategy. Do something good for them. What if you did that this week with your enemy? What if you just decided to do something good for them? Move their paper out of the grass where it's getting wet and onto the sidewalk or the pavement where they can get it. Send them cookies from that warm cookie delivery service. Pay for them, but send them anonymously. Do something good for your enemy. Look for a way to give them credit for something in a meeting or take their side. Do something good for the haters in your life. Now, if they go to our church, don't do any of that. Find something else, right? And so help me if a whole bunch of you send me anonymous warm cookies this week. Okay, any other week but this week for the warm cookies. Do something good for a hater. That's what Jesus says. Somebody that actively wishes ill will on you, do something good for them. They don't even have to know it was you. It's not just about them, it's about you. That's what he's going to show us. Keep reading, verse 28. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who mistreat you. So two different things. If you got somebody in your life that curses you, you have those people, they can only speak ill of you. They only say bad things about you. Every chance they get to bring you up, it's always in a negative light. Jesus says, bless them. Every time you get a chance to speak about them, make sure you say something in a positive light. I read a story not that long ago about a politician, actually, who was asked on the spot about a political opponent who had called him a dishonest sleazebag. And the microphone goes into his face, and the reporter says, what do you think about that? And the politician, get this, said, gosh, I'm really surprised to hear that. I've always thought of him as a really great friend. And I can't imagine that he would have said that about me. And I only want good for him and good for his life. You don't even know what party that guy is for. You think you do, but you don't. And you're thinking, I'd vote for that guy. Where can we find some politicians like that? What if it was you? What if you just decided every time you got a chance to talk about your political opponents, you'd bless them instead of cursing? Every time you got to talk about your ex-husband or your ex-wife with your kids, you'd shine a positive light on them. What if every time you got a chance to talk about that person in your sorority, that person in your fraternity who set themselves up as a person that never says anything good about you, that you only ever shine a positive light on them? Your former employee, your former boss. And then he talks about people that mistreat you. He says, for people that mistreat you, pray for them. Which seems like the easiest one. I think it's the hardest one. Listen, I can send you cookies and secretly hope you choke on them. I can say all kinds of nice things on the outside about you and hate you on the inside of me. When it comes to praying for you, before the God who lays the heart's secrets bare, I don't get to pretend with him. It's hard. Jesus says, pray for them. Look at verse 29. Someone slaps you on one cheek, turn to them the other also. If someone takes your coat, don't withhold from them your shirt. Give to everyone who asks you, and if anyone takes what belongs to you, do not demand it back. All right, the slap on the cheek thing is not primarily about physical violence. If you really want to wound somebody physically, you don't slap them with an open hand. That's what this is talking about. It's more about an insult than it is about physical violence. And we've said this before, let me say it again. The advice of Jesus in the presence of physical abuse is never sit in there and take it. Get away, get some help. This is talking primarily about an insult. This is not, thank you, sir, may I have another. More the idea of insult than injury. But either way, the idea is remain open to them. In Greek culture, you greeted a person with a kiss on a cheek. Jesus is saying essentially, don't turn your back on them. Turn your cheek towards them. Stay open to them, just in case they have a change of heart. And then he says, if somebody takes your coat, don't withhold your shirt. This is where you really start to get a picture of what Jesus is trying to get you to understand in these instructions. You really start to get the point that Jesus is launching into. The idea of both of these commands is not go passive in the middle of a conflict. It's go generous in the face of an enemy. It's really about having an attitude of abundance that Jesus is going after here. Jesus is saying, if they take something from you, act first on the fact that you've got something more to give. You live in abundance. Not only does generosity have the power to transform your enemy, and it does. Remember Les Miserables? The bishop invites Jean Valjean into his place where he stays. He gives him shelter. And Jean Valjean responds by stealing his silverware. And when the law catches up with Jean Valjean and they bring him back in to return what he's stolen, the bishop looks at him and says, the silver was a gift. And by the way, I'm so glad you came back. You forgot to take the silver candlesticks too. And it totally transforms Jean Valjean. But isn't it also true? Isn't it also true, and it's true with your enemies as well, that when they take something from you and you respond with generosity, it transforms you from being the victim of them to the one taking the lead? Isn't that the way that works? It's like a judo move. It takes all of the force, something that was designed to put them one up over you, and it moves you into the lead position. You're essentially declaring, I'm so far ahead, I can spot you some points. Use some language that Stephen Covey made famous. Most of us live and do relationships with what he calls a scarcity mindset. Scarcity is the idea that what I have and what I need is in limited supply. The fact that what I have, what I need today, is no guarantee. It's no guarantee that I'll have what I need for tomorrow. So I can't afford any debits. I might run out of credit. So to use Jesus' example of that, my identity is based on something that's in limited supply. So if you insult who I am, I might be less tomorrow. So I need to protect my identity. I need to close myself off. I need to protect my balance. So I got to get even with them, or I'll be less than who I was. When it comes to our physical needs, Jesus gives that example. What I need physically is in limited supply. And if they take what I have, I may have less than what I need from this point on for the rest of my life. See that? So I got to stay even. Jesus says, don't live, don't do life, don't do relationships, don't do conflict with a scarcity mindset. Live with an abundance mindset, a perspective that says, I have everything that I need, and my Heavenly Father will provide it. So if they slap me on my cheek, I'm learning to respond, hey, I got another cheek. Check it out. They take my cloak from me. I'm learning to live with a mindset that says, wow, they took my coat, but I still got a shirt. That's the question. What would it look like with your enemy to do something extravagantly generous? It's related to what they took from you. Do that this week with them. Jesus says that's how to fight without losing to your enemies. You have that in mind? Now, you get to the end here of what Jesus says. You and I should do the strategy for fighting with our enemies. All of us are going to have one of three responses. Okay, and some of you are sitting there thinking about them right now. Some of us are in a moment right now where we just heard that and we're saying, that's ridiculous, I'm never going to do that. I'm never going to do that because he has no idea what was taken from me, has no idea what was done to me, has no idea what my enemy is, who they are, what they've taken, how far I am in the debit to them. It's ridiculous, I'm never doing that. That's some of us. Some of us are responding, okay, I'll do it. I mean, it sounds hard, but I got it. I'll do that this week. Love my enemy. Okay, if either of those two responses is your response, listen really, really carefully. I got good news first. Good news is you're in really good company. Those of you that say, nope, I won't do it. Those of you that say, okay, I will. You're in good company because those were the two responses of all of the people standing there on the mountain when Jesus delivered his famous Sermon on the Mount. Some of them walked away and they said, I won't. Others walked away and determined, I will. Listen, both of them completely missed the point of the sermon. Jesus' sermon, just like all of my sermons and any sermon you ever hear, they're always designed to lead people towards a step. The whole point of the Sermon on the Mount was to invite people who were listening to a response. The response that he was leading them to was not a response that says, I won't. It wasn't a response that says, I will. It was a response that says, I can't. I can't. And you know the saddest part of the whole Sermon on the Mount? When Matthew records this same sermon, and when Luke tells this sermon we just read, both of them reflect it. Jesus preaches this incredible sermon. His main point of the sermon is you have to be more righteous than the most religious person that you know. And he wraps up this sermon with this killer illustration that all of us still remember, even if you didn't grow up in church. There was a wise man, and he built his house on a rock. There was a foolish man, and he built his house on the sand, and the rains came down, and the floods came up, and the house on the sand went splat. Then Matthew and Luke both tell us Jesus finished the illustration, and the people listening to the sermon went their separate ways. They passed Jesus on the way down the mountain. Some of them accidentally made eye contact with him, so they said what people say when they accidentally make eye contact with the pastor after church. Hey, good sermon, pastor. They took their notes from their worship guide, they stuffed it in their Bible. They started arguing about where they were going to go for lunch. And they never asked the question. Jesus, I can't love my enemy like that. I can't do good to them. I can't bless them. I can't pray for them. My life feels like it's tied on to them. And my enemy is the rain and the flood, and my foundation is crumbling, and I don't know what to do about it. And God, I can't love them. How can I love them? How do I find abundance so I can live in it, build my life on it? Because I want more than just getting even with my enemies. But I can't want more than that right now. Nobody asks the question because they weren't listening to Jesus. It takes 11 of them, at least a few months, maybe a few years to ask the question and receive their answer. A huge group of them assumed they knew the answer to the question that they never asked. Don't let that be you today. Jesus wants you to look at his commands and his strategy and his standard, his promise, and say, Jesus, I can't do what you're asking me to do. So that Jesus can respond to you. I can. Trust me. I will. Jesus is not asking you to do anything for anyone else that he didn't ultimately do for you. In fact, the word credit in Jesus' sermon is like a huge flashing beacon light indicator for all of us who look back at the message trying to find his point. The word that's translated credit, it's translated credit from time to time. It's the Greek word charis. You know what else it gets translated? grace. Grace. Jesus is dropping a hint for all of us who ask the question to remind us of who he is and why he came and what he promises. We are followers of a God who died for us when we were his enemies. The whole story of the Bible is we were enemies of God. We set ourselves up to fight against him, what he wanted, what he decreed, what he declared, what he promised. But rather than pursuing us to destroy us, he pursued us to lavish credit, love, grace on us. The only way for you to have credit with God is to receive grace from him. Grace is undeserved. It's unearned, unmerited favor. You can't earn it. In fact, to try to earn it only offends it. I mean, think about it. Think about with your enemy, the thing that they did to you, the thing that they stole from you or took from you. If your enemy came to you after all they did to you and said, hey, I've been thinking about what I did, and I think I want to make it right, so I'm going to mow your grass real quick. Can we make this all go away? What if your enemy came to you and said, I've been thinking about our relationship, and man, I'm real sorry. So here's what I think I'm going to promise to you. I'm going to try hard from this point on. I'm going to show up at your house like once a week. I'll show up as long as I don't have other stuff coming on. Sometimes we get busy, but when I'll show up from time to time. And while I'm there, I'm going to sing songs to you. I know that seems weird, but I'm going to do that. I'm going to sing songs to you that other people wrote, but I'll pretend like they're mine. They reflect what I think. And sometimes I'll even try to think those things while I sing them. That's my promise. I'll listen to your friends say good stuff about you, and when they say good stuff about you, I'm going to agree with them. And I tell you what, I'll leave a little tip while I'm there to cover the cost of, what I consumed while I was around. We good? You would say, not only are we not good, we're less good than we were before. The idea that you can replace your debit with that kind of credit is crazy. And yet that's some of us in our relationship with God, isn't it? The Bible calls us his enemies. He created us. He gave us life. He lavishes his love on us, and he invites us into a relationship with him. And so many of us have just said, no thanks. I'll do it my own way. We've worked against the giver of life in our life and in the lives of the people that he loves. We've set ourselves up as the enemy of God and tried to pretend that by being moral, making promises, showing up, we can earn credit. We're further away than we've ever been. God doesn't want you to get to even with him. He wants to give you credit. He wants to lavish his credit on you. And you can't have it by promising. Can't have it by trying. Can't have it by hoping. Can only have it by receiving. Would you pray with me? The story of the Bible is that Jesus came to pay your debt. You owed the giver of life death. And Jesus died. And he paid for your sin, and he took it into a grave, and he walked out without it. And he offers you his life, credit, grace, as a gift that costs you nothing. And if in this moment you realize you spent your whole life trying to earn something that God wants to give, this would be a perfect moment for you to say, God, I'm going to stop trying to pay for something that Jesus has already paid for. I could never pay you back. I could never even get to even. But in a relationship with you, I need more than even. I need credit. And I believe Jesus paid to give it to me. Life forever and life abundant. His life inside of me, giving me the strength that I don't have to be who I can't be. I want to trust him for forgiveness and everlasting life. You can do that right where you sit, right now. Lord, for those who are trusting you for the very first time today, I pray, Lord, that they would tell somebody not to try to get more credit, so they can understand what extraordinary credit you've lavished on them. For those of us, Lord, who have already trusted you for everlasting life, I pray that we would live as people who've received extravagant grace, and that it would overflow out of us into the lives of the people around us, and yes, even our enemies, the people that we can't love on our own. Would you do something in us? Would you live your life through us so that we who follow you could follow you even in this? We ask it in Jesus' name.